What if the idea of equality that we worship isn't a virtue, but a tranquilizing myth? What if beneath its glowing promises of fairness and compassion hides a slow poison that weakens excellence, distorts truth, and punishes greatness? We live in an age where the word equality is used like a sacred spell. It ends arguments. It silences dissent. To question it is to be branded heartless or backward. But few dare to ask, what kind of equality are we really talking about? Equality of opportunity, where everyone begins the race on the same starting line, is noble. It's the foundation of justice. But equality of outcome, where everyone must finish at the same place, regardless of their choices, efforts, or abilities, is something else entirely. That is not fairness. That is forced uniformity. Imagine a young man, brilliant, driven, hungry to prove himself. He aces every exam, stays late to perfect his projects, questions deeply, and dares boldly. He doesn't ask for privilege. He doesn't expect shortcuts. He believes in merit, that the world will reward those who give their all. But when the moment comes to recognize achievement, he is passed over. A scholarship is handed to someone with lower scores, less passion, less work, because that person fits a demographic checkbox. A promotion he earned is given to a peer who didn't perform, but who balances the company's diversity report. He is told politely, of course, that it's not about him, it's about progress. Now ask yourself, how does he feel? Not angry, not entitled, but disoriented, betrayed. He did everything right. He played by the rules, but the rules were changed without warning. The game was rigged for fairness, and in doing so, it became anything but fair. This isn't a dystopian fantasy. It's a reality playing out in classrooms, offices, institutions all around us. And it's not just about race or gender. It's about the deeper moral shift of our time, the replacement of merit with managed outcomes. And here's the hardest truth. Forced equality destroys motivation. Why should anyone strive for excellence if excellence is penalized? Why should you break yourself to be better when the reward goes to someone who didn't break at all but checked the right box? Slowly, the will to grow dies. People stop reaching. They settle, because greatness now comes with guilt, and ambition is treated like arrogance. But it doesn't end there. The lie of equality of outcome damages more than just the gifted. It also poisons those it's meant to help. The recipients of unearned rewards aren't empowered. They're silently doubted. A woman who wins an award wonders if people think she earned it or if she was given it. A man hired through a quota senses the subtle disrespect in the room. He may not say it out loud, but he feels it that his place wasn't earned, it was engineered. So now no one wins. The talented are demoralized. The protected feel condescended to, and everyone walks on eggshells, pretending this is progress, while excellence, trust, and authenticity bleed out in silence. This is not a rejection of justice. It's a cry for clarity. Justice is when everyone gets a fair shot, not when we rig the ending. Justice is when the fastest runner wins the race, not when we tie their legs so others can catch up. Equality of outcome sounds noble, but in practice it demands one thing, that we pretend people are the same when they are not, that we ignore differences in effort, talent drive, and character, that we replace real achievement with artificial balance. And that lie, however well-intentioned, erodes the foundation of excellence. Because the truth is, people are not equal in ability, in desire, in discipline. That's not cruelty, that's reality, and to deny it is to wage war on the very thing that moves humanity forward, individual greatness. Let's be clear, the goal isn't to go backward. The goal is to move forward without losing what made us rise in the first place. The courage to let the best rise wherever they come from, whatever they look like. So the next time someone tells you, we must guarantee equal outcomes, ask them at what cost. Ask them who we must overlook, who we must silence, who we must diminish in order to pretend we are all the same. Because if we keep choosing comfort over truth, sameness over excellence, we may wake up one day in a world where no one dares to be great, and where greatness is no longer even recognized. What happens to a society when merit is no longer the measure of success? What does it mean when excellence is punished not by accident, but by design? It begins subtly, a scholarship denied, a promotion postponed. A voice silenced, not because it was wrong, but because it was too right for the moment. Imagine a young man named Alex. Top of his class, disciplined, hungry, focused, not born into privilege. In fact, he clawed his way up late nights, part-time jobs, and relentless hours spent mastering every subject, every challenge. He didn't expect favors. He believed in one thing. If I work harder than everyone else, I'll earn my spot. Then the day came, a prestigious scholarship. His dream since freshman year was within reach. He had the grades, the awards, the recommendations, but he didn't get it. The scholarship went to someone else, not because they did better, but because they filled a diversity quota. The panel smiled and said, "We have to consider representation." He sat in stunned silence, not out of arrogance, but out of heartbreak. All his work, all his sacrifice swept aside for a checkbox, and it didn't stop there. Years later in the workplace, he excelled again. Innovated, took on extra load, solved problems others avoided. But when it came time for promotion, the role went to someone with less experience. Once again, the message was clear. Your merit is seen, but it isn't the priority. These are not isolated moments. They're echoes of a new norm, a shift in values. We say we value hard work, but our actions betray that claim. We speak of merit but reward identity. And so, excellence, true excellence is quietly penalized, not with punishment but with invisibility. This isn't just unfair, it's corrosive. It sends a message to every high performer. Tone it down. Don't shine too bright. Don't make others uncomfortable with your success, because the new ideal is not to be the best, but to be balanced. And balance means sacrificing some so others can rise. But here's the tragedy. This doesn't truly uplift anyone. The person who receives the reward due to a quota often feels the weight of that decision. They may smile publicly, but deep inside they ask, "Did I truly earn this?" And others wonder too. A woman promoted by mandate rather than merit is not empowered. She is undermined. A minority who wins an award with an asterisk doesn't feel victorious. They feel used. Quotas at their worst reduce human beings to symbols. Not individuals with agency and ambition, but pawns in a larger ideological game. And when we play that game, we lose something precious, the sanctity of earned achievement. Let's be honest, the world is not, and never has been, perfectly fair. But the one promise that made it bearable, the one hope that drove generations forward, was that effort mattered, that your work could speak louder than your background, that grit could outrun luck. That idea is now under siege. By prioritizing quotas over quality, we teach people to compete in the wrong race, not to become better, but to become more representative. And the irony, this new form of equity breeds the very resentment it claims to cure. The overlooked grow bitter, the favored grow insecure, and the system slowly collapses into cynicism. In this environment, people stop trusting institutions. They stop believing in fairness. And once that belief dies, ambition dies with it. Why reach when reaching gets your hand slapped? Why rise when rising paints a target on your back? And what about the long-term cost? When we select leaders, scholars, scientists, and thinkers, not because they're the best, but because they're demographically correct, what happens to innovation, to excellence, to truth? History is clear. Civilizations do not rise on the back of quotas. They rise on excellence. They rise when the best are allowed, encouraged to lead. When genius is recognized, when drive is celebrated, not suppressed. So what do we say to people like Alex? To those who strive, achieve, and are told to wait their turn for fairness. We tell them to keep going. We tell them the system is flawed, but their effort is not. We tell them that real merit will always shine, maybe not immediately, maybe not with applause, but inevitably. Because here's the truth. Systems that penalize excellence don't last. They rot from the inside. They become hollow, performative, brittle. But individuals who hold on to merit, who keep building, growing, striving, they become the foundation of something new, something real. So let's stop punishing excellence for political comfort. Let's stop pretending that fairness means sameness. And let's begin again with a simple but powerful truth. Achievement matters, always has, always will. Why does modern society fear the exceptional? Why does brilliance threaten us? Why does ambition make people uncomfortable? And why do we applaud mediocrity while silently punishing greatness? Friedrich Nietzsche saw it all coming. More than a century ago, this iconoclastic German philosopher with his fierce mustache and even fiercer mind looked into the soul of Western civilization and predicted a moral inversion. He called it herd morality, a belief system not born from truth or virtue, but from resentment. According to Nietzsche, morality wasn't some divine gift handed down by gods. It was a weapon, a psychological tool crafted by the weak majority to contain the strong minority. He argued that most people being average and fearful couldn't compete with those who stood out. So instead of trying to rise, they changed the rules of the game. They redefined strength as evil. They called confidence arrogance. And they began to sanctify weakness, calling it virtue. It's a shocking idea, almost offensive, but look closely at the world around you. Don't we see exactly this dynamic playing out in schools, in workplaces, in culture? The more someone shines, the more society whispers. Tone it down. Don't be so intense. You're making others uncomfortable. The tall poppy is always the first to be cut. Nietzsche illustrated this in one of his most powerful parables, The Lambs and the Birds of Prey. The lambs, soft and vulnerable, live in constant fear of the eagles. And so, in their helplessness, they invent a moral narrative. These birds of prey are evil, the lambs whisper. And we, the meek, must be good, not because it's true, but because it comforts them. It gives their weakness meaning, and it lets them label the strong as wicked, so they no longer have to feel inferior. It's a moral inversion, born not of enlightenment, but of survival, instinct, and envy. Now cast this onto today's society. The lambs are no longer literal sheep. They are the masses addicted to comfort, to conformity, to emotional validation. And the eagles. They are those rare individuals who rise above, the unapologetically excellent, the independent thinkers, the ones who refuse to play small to make others feel safe. But in today's world, the eagles are being asked to clip their wings. The vocabulary has changed, but the logic remains the same. High performers are told to check their privilege. Strong personalities are labeled problematic. Assertiveness becomes toxicity. Excellence is viewed as a threat to equity, and the most ambitious among us are often portrayed as dangerous, oppressive, or in need of correction. We call this progress, but Nietzsche would call it herd morality in action. It's not hard to see why this is appealing to the many. When we crown the average as noble, we no longer have to confront our own limitations. When we redefine success as unfair, we can justify our stagnation. When we paint the ambitious as villains, we feel better about our own lack of drive, and so the herd grows more self-righteous, more moralistic, while those who excel are quietly exiled. But here's the twist. The eagles don't hate the lambs. In Nietzsche's words, the strong have nothing against the weak. In fact, nothing tastes better than a tender lamb. It's not the strong who initiate the conflict. It's the weak who, driven by resentment, turn their helplessness into morality and wage a silent war against excellence. This is why Nietzsche saw morality not as truth, but as a clever fiction, a tool of the many to shackle the few, a system that protects comfort at the expense of greatness. And most dangerously, a belief that teaches the exceptional to feel guilty for being exceptional. Ask yourself, how many people do you know who hide their gifts, who dull their light to fit in, who silence their ideas so they won't be called arrogant? How many students stop raising their hand because others roll their eyes? How many innovators go quiet because they fear being labeled too intense? This is the legacy of herd morality, a culture that whispers conformity and punishes excellence. And the damage is deeper than we admit. When we elevate sameness over merit, we don't just hurt the high performers, we stunt the entire culture. Because it's the eagles who pull us forward. It's the ones who dare to be different, who lift humanity to its next stage. Nietzsche's message wasn't one of cruelty, it was a call to honesty. He didn't hate the weak. He simply refused to pretend that weakness was strength. He refused to accept a world where the exceptional must apologize for being born with fire in their chest. So the question is this: will we continue this quiet war on greatness? Will we keep shaming the eagles to comfort the herd? Or will we have the courage to let them fly, even if it means we have to look up? Because in the end, a society that clips its eagles doesn't protect the lambs. It just ensures that no one ever soars again. What if morality wasn't about truth or justice, but about fear? What if the virtues we celebrate were not born from wisdom or compassion, but from the terrified whisper of the weak, trying to survive in a world of strength? Friedrich Nietzsche didn't believe in comfortable lies. He believed in unearthing the raw, uncomfortable core of human nature. And one of his most powerful metaphors reveals that core. Like no other, the parable of the lambs and the birds of prey. It begins like this in The Wild Eagles Hunt Lambs. It's not personal, it's not evil, it's nature. The eagle must eat and the lamb is prey. But the lambs, unable to fight back, do something else. They moralize. They gather in their frightened flocks and declare, "These eagles are evil, they hurt us, therefore we must be good." And thus begins the inversion of values. Strength becomes wicked. Meekness becomes divine. Nietzsche's genius was in exposing what this really was not a philosophy of truth, but of self-preservation through self-deception. The lambs, vulnerable and powerless, cannot rise to the level of the eagle, so they create a moral system that justifies their inferiority. They define themselves as righteous, not because they are righteous, but because it's the only way to feel safe. If they can't defeat the eagle, they will shame it, redefine it, strip it of nobility, and turn its nature into a sin. Now step out of the parable and into the real world. Today's society is filled with lambs who speak in the language of virtue, but act from the place of fear. They cannot soar like the eagle, so they gather in flocks and rewrite the rules. They say ambition is selfish, success is privilege, masculine strength is toxic, excellence is exclusion. Like the lambs of Nietzsche's vision, they demonize that which they cannot become. And here's the twist: the eagles never hated the lambs, they barely noticed them. Nietzsche wrote, "We have nothing against these good lambs. In fact, nothing tastes better than a tender lamb." The predator does not moralize, it simply acts according to its nature, but the prey moralizes because it must. The point isn't to glorify brutality, it's to confront the uncomfortable dynamic of power and morality. Nietzsche wasn't saying the strong should dominate the weak. He was saying, be careful when the weak moralize, because often their morality is not a path to truth, but a camouflage for resentment. Think about it in today's language: the ambitious entrepreneur who is accused of greed, the top student who is told they must check their privilege, the bold speaker silenced for being too intense. The eagles are not punished for wrongdoing, they are punished for flying higher than the flock allows. And the flock always claims virtue. They don't say they hate the eagle, they say they are protecting fairness, creating equity, defending the vulnerable. But Nietzsche saw through this facade. He saw that behind the smiles of social justice often hides the clenched jaw of envy. What does this do to a society? It trains eagles to fly lower. It makes the bold second-guess their instincts. It teaches the gifted to apologize for their gifts, and slowly the skies grow quieter. Innovation slows, courage fades, greatness becomes taboo. But here's the deeper danger: a morality born from fear cannot lead to greatness. It can only lead to mediocrity. When we build systems that protect the lambs at all costs, even at the cost of truth, we do not create safety. We create stagnation. We build a world where no one gets eaten. Yes, but also no one learns to hunt. No one rises. No one transforms. This is why Nietzsche hated slave morality, because it robbed people of the one thing that makes life noble, the will to rise even when it hurts. He challenged us not to live like lambs clinging to comfort, but like eagles unafraid to be hated, unafraid to be called evil by those who misunderstand strength. Because sometimes the most moral thing you can do is refuse to shrink just to fit into someone else's definition of goodness. The lambs whisper, We must bring down the eagle or no one will be safe, but in doing so, they ensure that no one will ever soar again. So the question becomes personal. Are you living like a lamb, moralizing your fear, cloaking envy in virtue? Or do you have the courage to live like the eagle, silent, focused, unrepentant in your strength, because the world doesn't need more softness disguised as ethics. It needs flight, it needs height, it needs a return to the sky. What happens when a society declares war on the very force that makes us human? What happens when the drive to rise, to overcome, to achieve greatness is labeled selfish, oppressive, even dangerous? Friedrich Nietzsche had a name for that drive. He called it the will to power. Not power in the narrow political sense, not domination over others for its own sake, but power as life force. The internal flame that pushes the seed to break through the soil, the artist to create in defiance of despair, the thinker to question the world, and the warrior to fight impossible battles simply because something inside refuses to kneel. It is the essence of human vitality. It is evolution in motion. It is the soul reaching for its highest potential. But today, that force is under siege. Modern ideology, cloaked in the language of fairness and empathy, tells us that this striving, this will to power, is somehow toxic. It whispers, don't try too hard, don't shine too bright, don't climb too high. It's unfair to those who can't. We call this culture woke, but at its worst, excesses. It's not awake at all. It's asleep to human nature, blind to the truth that greatness is rare and always will be. The will to power says, strive. The woke agenda replies, don't outshine others. You'll make them feel excluded. The will to power says, compete with yourself. Rise above yesterday's self. The woke agenda says, why compete at all? Everyone's a winner now. The will to power says, master your craft, own your path, transcend limits. The woke agenda says, your success might be privilege. Tone it down, make space. This is not progress. This is a quiet domestication of the human spirit. Nietzsche warned us. He didn't believe in suppressing the strong to protect the weak. He believed in inspiring the weak to become strong, not by comfort, but by challenge. In his eyes, the will to power was the very engine of civilization, driving artists to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel inventors, to split atoms visionaries, to build nations. Without it, we regress, we flatten, we fade, and that's exactly what's happening. In classrooms, we reward emotional compliance over intellectual rigor. In workplaces, promotions are guided more by demographic spreadsheets than actual results. In media, we glorify struggle, but demonize victory. And in social spaces, we've turned excellence into something we must apologize for. But the will to power doesn't apologize. It burns quietly in the hearts of those who refuse to surrender. It is the student who studies harder, not for applause but for mastery. It is the athlete who trains alone while others sleep, not for fame but for the joy of domination over one's limits. It is the woman who builds an empire not out of spite, but out of an unshakable need to express the full force of her being. And it is this very fire that the modern narrative seeks to extinguish. Why? Because it's unpredictable, because it doesn't obey quotas, because it doesn't apologize, because the will to power reminds people of their own passivity. And nothing is more threatening to the herd than someone who doesn't need it. So society crafts a new morality, one that praises passivity, that elevates victimhood to virtue. That says, you are owed something just because you exist, but nature doesn't owe anyone anything. Excellence is earned, not granted. Dignity is discovered in the struggle, not handed down from the system. And yet this new morality whispers in every ear, sit down, be humble, don't offend, don't stand out. It speaks the language of kindness, but it breathes the air of control. Because the moment someone dares to break free, dares to strive to outpace, to outperform, they become a threat. Not because they are wrong, but because they are proof that effort still matters, and that proof undermines the entire illusion. So what happens when this tension explodes? It starts with silence. The brilliant young man or woman who once dreamed of greatness begins to wonder if it's worth it. If success only brings suspicion, if visibility only invites criticism, if winning will just make them a target, and slowly they lower their eyes, they walk a little slower, they speak a little softer, the will to power doesn't die. It just goes underground, shamed into silence. But here's the truth. Nietzsche would demand we confront. You cannot kill the will to power. You can suppress it. You can shame it. You can label it toxic or problematic, but you cannot erase it. It is not a social construct. It is a biological, existential force. And when you deny it, society decays. The ambitious withdraw. The brave are exiled. The competent are handcuffed, and mediocrity becomes the law of the land. This is not liberation. This is stagnation with a smile. Nietzsche's call was not to oppress, but to inspire, to awaken the noble fire inside every soul, to say, rise, strive. Excel not for the crowd, not for the applause, but because it is your nature to climb. Because there is no higher moral calling than to become what you are fully, fearlessly, unapologetically. So ask yourself, are you hiding your power to make others comfortable? Are you dimming your light because the room is filled with shadows? If so, understand this, your will to power is not the problem, it's the solution. The world doesn't need more guilt, it needs greatness. It needs individuals who dare to rise, even when the world tells them not to. Let them whisper, let them accuse, let them moralize you. You were born to fly. What if the world doesn't want you to think? What if the very act of questioning, of seeing differently, of refusing the collective script makes you dangerous in the eyes of the herd? Arthur Schopenhauer, the brooding 19th century philosopher, often overshadowed by Nietzsche, saw conformity not as a benign habit, but as a fundamental threat to truth. In a world obsessed with sameness, Schopenhauer believed that the greatest crime was not being wrong, but daring to be different. He wrote, "What the herd hates most is not error. It is the one who thinks differently. It's not the content of your thought that unsettles people, but the audacity of thinking for yourself at all." And in that line lies a chilling truth, because it's not just oppressive regimes that fear dissent, it's ordinary society. It's classrooms where unpopular opinions are silenced with glares. It's workplaces where independent minds are labeled difficult. It's social media where the algorithm rewards compliance and punishes nuance. We live in a world where independent thought is a provocation, not a virtue. Schopenhauer saw this clearly, long before cancel culture, before digital mobs, before echo chambers. He understood something timeless. The herd doesn't want truth, it wants comfort, it wants agreement, it wants validation. And when someone challenges that, when someone says, maybe this emperor has no clothes, they are met not with curiosity but with hostility. Because to think differently is to force others, to confront the parts of themselves they've ignored, to dissent is to become a mirror. And people don't always like what they see in it. But Schopenhauer didn't just critique conformity. He also unmasked the darker attitudes that often hide beneath polite society. He was brutally honest, sometimes uncomfortably so. He didn't believe in illusions of human perfectibility. He believed that beneath the surface, people were driven not by noble ideals, but by blind will, irrational cravings, and emotional survival. In other words, most people don't think, they react. They don't reflect, they follow. That might sound cynical, but it's a cynicism born not from hatred, but from clarity. And in some ways, it's a warning. Today, as we drift deeper into the culture of enforced agreement, where diversity of identity is celebrated, but diversity of thought is crushed, Schopenhauer's message becomes prophetic. The pressure to conform has never been louder, not just politically, but psychologically. You are allowed to express anything as long as it fits the approved narrative. You are allowed to be unique as long as you don't disturb the moral consensus. But the human spirit was not built for moral consensus. It was built for truth, and truth is rarely popular. Schopenhauer wasn't a motivational speaker. He didn't offer easy answers. He didn't believe everyone was destined for greatness. But he respected the mind. He respected solitude. He believed that some people, rare, people would dare to step outside the herd and face the loneliness that comes with clarity. And here's the paradox: in a world addicted to connection, the clearest minds often walk alone. So if you've ever felt like the outsider in a room full of agreement, if you've ever said something that made people shift uncomfortably, not because it was wrong, but because it was real, if you've ever felt the pull to think for yourself, even when everyone told you not to, you are not broken. You are awake. In Schopenhauer's eyes, you are exactly what the world fears and exactly what it needs. What if equality isn't progress, but erosion? What if beneath the glowing slogans and noble ideals of modern egalitarianism lies not a vision of justice, but a silent war on hierarchy, identity, and meaning? Few thinkers have challenged modern sensibilities as ruthlessly as Julius Evola. A 20th century Italian philosopher, Evola, was not merely a critic of liberal democracy or social reform, he was its enemy. To many he is offensive, to others dangerously honest. But love him or loathe him, one thing is certain: he said what others were too afraid to say. At the heart of Evola's worldview was a simple but explosive idea. Equality is a myth, and one that destroys civilization from the inside out. He believed that nature itself is built on inequality, not just of ability, but of essence. Men and women are not the same, not interchangeable, not made for identical destinies, too. Evola gender roles were not social constructs, they were spiritual archetypes. Masculine and feminine principles, in his view, existed not to compete, but to complement in a cosmic structure that mirrored order, not chaos. So when modern society began to push for equality, not just in opportunity, but in outcome and identity, Evola didn't just disagree, he saw it as decadence, as civilizational decay, disguised as compassion. In his words, when a woman seeks to emulate man, she does not elevate herself. She becomes a caricature. A monkey? He quotes harshly, echoing the radical traditionalism he preached. Today that sounds outrageous, offensive, even hateful. But beneath the inflammatory language lies a question worth wrestling with. What if forcing sameness between the sexes doesn't empower, but disorients? What if by erasing distinction, we don't liberate anyone, we just strip both men and women of their anchors? Evola believed that when a woman embraces her unique feminine power, she doesn't become less, she becomes more. But when she tries to imitate masculine traits, not aligned with her essence, she doesn't gain strength, she loses identity. To Evola, a woman found her highest self, not in equality with man, but in harmonic contrast to him, just as fire and water don't compete, but complete. The tragedy in his eyes was that modernity didn't just blur these lines, it attacked them. But this wasn't just about gender. For Evola, the real crime of modernity was the leveling of all natural hierarchies between the noble and the vulgar, the wise and the ignorant, the disciplined and the indulgent. Egalitarianism, he argued, doesn't raise the low, it lowers the high. It doesn't inspire excellence, it punishes it. He saw the rise of mass democracy, diversity quotas, and gender neutrality, not as progress, but as the unraveling of sacred order. And though his tone was often incendiary, his fear was clear when a society no longer recognizes the natural differences between individuals and groups. It slides into spiritual nihilism, a world where no one leads, no one follows, and everything becomes bland, rootless, and directionless. This is why Evola admired aristocracy, not as wealth or birthright, but as spiritual rank. He believed that true order emerges when people rise according to their inner nobility, not external mandates. And for him, that included accepting that not everyone is equal, not in capacity, not in purpose, and not in role. It's tempting to dismiss Evola as a relic of a darker time, but the deeper question his philosophy poses still lingers. Have we gone so far in our pursuit of equality that we now fear excellence, fear difference, fear hierarchy? Because if we fear those things, we may also fear truth. The truth that some people are born to lead while others are not. That men and women, while equal in dignity, are not identical in energy. That structure is not oppression, it is direction. And when direction is lost, society doesn't stand still, it falls. Evola's world is harsh. It doesn't flatter the modern ego, but it's not without value. It reminds us that not all order is tyranny, and not all inequality is injustice. Sometimes inequality is the foundation of meaning, beauty, and growth, like the mountain that towers above the valley, not to crush it, but to give it scale, contrast, and purpose. So the question isn't whether Evola is right in every detail. The question is, what do we lose when we flatten everything in the name of fairness? Maybe it's time to stop running from the idea of hierarchy and start asking what it truly means to rise. What if inequality isn't a problem to be solved, but a reality to be understood? What if the differences between us, our talents, temperaments, and trajectories aren't the result of oppression or unfairness, but the very fabric of nature itself? For all the slogans about equality, for all the well-intentioned efforts to level the playing field, there is a truth we rarely dare speak aloud. Human beings are not born the same, and pretending otherwise does not create justice. It creates confusion, resentment, and a society that punishes those who excel. Science knows this. Psychology knows this. Even nature, in its silent rhythms, proclaims it. Let's start with one of the most misunderstood truths. Variability research has consistently shown that males exhibit greater variability in traits such as intelligence, aptitude, and even emotional extremes. This doesn't mean men are better. It means they are more likely to appear at both the top and bottom ends of the spectrum. There are more male prodigies. There are also more male failures. This is not an opinion. It's observable across cultures, generations, and testing methods. For example, large-scale studies in education consistently show that males dominate both the highest and lowest percentiles in math and science performance. In contrast, females tend to cluster around the average, exhibiting more consistency but fewer extremes. This helps explain why men are often overrepresented in fields that require top-end performance: elite chess, theoretical physics, competitive mathematics, not necessarily because of discrimination, but because of statistical distribution. And yet, when we look at those outcomes, we rush to judgment. We say the results must be biased, the system must be broken. And so we propose fixes, quotas, affirmative action, adjusted metrics, all with the goal of making the numbers look right. But numbers don't tell the full story. Behind every chart is a human being driven by internal desires shaped by biology, personality, and countless unconscious variables. And the uncomfortable truth is this equality of outcome assumes that if everything were truly fair, everyone would end up in the same place. But that's not what fairness means. That's what sameness means. And sameness is the death of human diversity. Let's go even deeper in the most gender-equal countries in the world. Sweden, Norway, Finland, where women and men have nearly identical legal rights and access to resources. Career choices don't converge, they diverge. Women choose more people-oriented fields like healthcare, education, psychology. Men gravitate toward thing-oriented fields like engineering, physics, and computer science. This paradox, called the gender equality paradox, confounds social engineers. The more freedom you give people, the more natural preferences emerge, and those preferences are not politically correct, but they are honest. So what do we do with this reality? We can either keep fighting it, blaming patriarchy, capitalism, or any other scapegoat we can find, or we can respect the human spirit in all its chaotic, unequal brilliance. Because the real tragedy isn't that people are different. The real tragedy is when society tries to erase those differences by force, by shame, by policy, and ends up creating a culture of quiet despair. It's the high-performing student who begins to feel guilty for outperforming her peers. It's the hardworking employee who gets passed over for a less competent hire, chosen for representation. It's the quietly gifted child who hides their abilities to avoid being labeled arrogant. We're not empowering people, we're punishing nature. And perhaps most painful of all, those who are chosen through quotas or artificial equity often don't feel proud, they feel patronized. A woman who worked tirelessly to get into medical school doesn't want her classmates wondering if she earned her spot. She wants to be respected for her achievement, not reduced to a statistic in someone's diversity report. Here's the core of it. Real equality is equality of opportunity, giving every soul the chance to rise as far as their ability and will can take them. Inequality of outcome, on the other hand, is not injustice. It's the natural reflection of different strengths, passions, and paths. And that is not something to fix. It is something to honor. Because when we accept this truth, we stop trying to force everyone into the same mold. And instead, we start celebrating the full, raw, wild spectrum of human potential. What happens when fairness becomes a weapon? When the noble dream of giving everyone a chance turns into a bureaucratic machine that manipulates outcomes, mutes excellence, and quietly breaks the human spirit. The ideology of equity, as it's defined today, doesn't stop at creating opportunity. It goes further. It demands equal results. It demands that every group, every gender, every category end up in the same place. But this vision, though, dressed in compassion, leads not to justice, but to resentment, decay, and quiet despair. At first glance, it seems kind. Let's ensure everyone succeeds. It says, let's lift the disadvantaged, let's compensate for the past. But the moment outcome becomes the metric of justice, something dangerous begins. Because if outcomes differ, and they always do, then someone must be blamed. And if you refuse to believe those differences can be natural, you have no choice but to intervene. Punish, equalize by force, that's where the perverse consequences begin. You create winners who doubt themselves. A woman promoted because of a quota may smile for the camera, but deep down she wonders, did I really earn this? And worse, others wonder too. Her genuine accomplishments are shadowed by the suspicion that she was elevated, not for her merit, but for her category. Her victory is hollowed out by doubt, not from within, but from without. Then you create losers who feel cheated. The high-achieving man passed over. Despite superior qualifications, doesn't hate women nor women. He hates the system that rewarded something other than performance. He doesn't feel privileged, he feels discarded, overlooked, devalued. And that resentment simmers beneath the surface, polite, silent, but real. Now look around the workplace, filled with quiet tension, the school where excellence is muffled, the institution where decisions feel performative. It's not equality, it's a masquerade of justice where no one truly trusts the system, but no one is allowed to say it out loud. This is the double tragedy of enforced equity. It undermines the very people it claims to help, and it demoralizes those it excludes. Everyone loses. The talented feel like tokens. The overlooked feel betrayed. The mediocre feel invincible. And the entire system begins to rot from within. But it doesn't stop there. Equity, when enforced, requires a central authority to decide who gets what. And suddenly you have gatekeepers with unchecked power deciding who deserves advancement based not on effort or results, but on group identity. This creates a new elite, not of excellence, but of grievance. The aristocracy of victimhood. And in this system, the rules are always shifting. What qualifies as oppression today may not tomorrow. What group deserves correction today may be penalized the next. It's not truth. It's a moving target, and everyone walks on eggshells. You can't strive because ambition looks like aggression. You can't win because success looks like injustice. So you hide your talent. You silence your drive. You wait for permission to be yourself. This is not a culture of empowerment. It is a culture of fear and resentment where identity trumps merit and feelings outweigh facts. And here's the most bitter irony. Even those who benefit from equity often feel hollow. Because deep down, we all want to earn what we have. We want to be valued for who we are, not what box we check. Real pride comes from overcoming, from proving ourselves, not from being handed a title to satisfy a statistic. We forget true empowerment doesn't come from a helping hand. It comes from the strength we discover in ourselves. When we rob people of that struggle, we rob them of meaning. We tell them they're too fragile, to compete too weak, to climb too broken, to win fairly. That's not justice, that's patronizing cruelty, masked as compassion. So where does this lead? To a workplace where excellence is silenced, to schools where achievement is sidelined, to families where ambition is feared, to nations where mediocrity is the new virtue. and worst of all, to a generation that no longer knows what it feels like to earn something real. The dream of equity sounds beautiful, but when enforced, it becomes a nightmare, one that punishes the best, confuses the rest, and leaves us all quietly doubting the world we've built. What if real justice isn't sameness but freedom? Not freedom from effort, not freedom from inequality, but freedom to become what you truly are, without apology, without permission, and without artificial limits. In a world that has confused equality of outcome with fairness, we've forgotten a more powerful, more honest vision of justice. Merit, the right of every individual to rise based on their ability, their effort, and their character. No quotas, no filters, no labels. Just the raw, difficult, beautiful struggle to become excellent, and to let that excellence speak for itself. It begins with a simple idea: opportunity for all, outcome for those who earn it. Every runner should start at the same line. That's justice. But we must also accept that not every runner will finish at the same time. That's reality. And it's not something to fear, it's something to honor. Because it is in those unequal outcomes that we see greatness emerge. We see the sprinter who outruns the wind, the thinker who redefines a field, the creator who breaks boundaries. Their triumphs don't diminish us, they inspire us. But in today's culture, we're taught to look sideways, not upward. We're taught to resent the ones who rise too fast, to shame the ones who shine too bright. Why? Because they remind us of what we could be if we dared to try harder, if we embraced responsibility, if we stopped asking to be carried and started climbing on our own. That is the quiet crisis of our age. We are so obsessed with fairness that we have begun to fear excellence. We handicap the fast so the slow won't feel bad. We praise the average so no one feels left behind. But when you dull the edge of the sword, you don't make the world safer, you just make it weaker. Nietzsche called this the will to power, that internal drive in every human being to rise, to conquer challenges, to impose form upon chaos. It is not cruelty, it is not arrogance. It is life itself expressing its highest form. And when we suppress it for the sake of comfort or conformity, we don't create peace, we create a silent death, a culture of mediocrity where nothing great can grow. The truth is, merit is not just a system, it's a moral commitment. It says, I will not judge you by your name, your gender, your background, or your identity. I will judge you by what you do, by how hard you work, by what you create. Solve, build, or lead. That's the kind of justice that builds civilizations. That's what gave us Mozart, Tesla, Marie Curie, Da Vinci. Not forced equality, but freedom to excel. And yes, it means some rise higher than others. But that's the point. The tallest mountain doesn't shame the valley. It gives it perspective. It gives it direction. It shows what is possible. When we honor merit, we don't create losers. We create standards, and standards are what elevate the human race. They call us to more. They demand our best, and in reaching for them, even when we fall short, we grow. But if we replace that with a system of artificial balance, where the results are planned in advance, where outcomes are sculpted for optics, where individuals are reduced to demographic tokens, we don't get fairness, we get a lie. A staged performance where the script has already been written and no one is allowed to deviate. That's not justice, that's control. So where do we go from here? We return to truth, to effort, to merit. We build a society where opportunity is sacred, but outcomes are earned, where every child is taught not to demand success but to chase it, where rewards are not distributed to soothe feelings, but to celebrate mastery. We teach that failure is not oppression, but feedback, that competition is not cruelty, but growth, that envy is not a virtue, but a poison, and that the path to greatness is open to all, but walked only by the few who dare. Yes, it will be hard. Yes, it will be unequal, but it will be real. And in that reality, we will find something far more powerful than comfort. We will find dignity, meaning direction, and above all, the right to rise.